Yeah, welcome back. We're going to do Filmmaker Reacts again. This is going to be a reaction to this guy, Tyler Mowery. He has this series, Building a TV Series, episode 1, writing a pilot, writing a TV pilot. I need to check and see. I actually haven't, I don't remember if I've seen the rest of his Building a TV Series, but I thought I'd jump in since I went to film school. My MFA is writing and producing for television, and so much of that is the pilot stuff. So before that, I just want to say, as I always do, I don't think filmmaking, I don't think storytelling, I don't think any of this creative stuff is exclusionary. It just happens to be expensive, which makes it exclusionary. But honestly, it's a language, and so if you want to inject yourself, if you want to be a part of it, if you want to, learn it, yeah, you can do it. I consider storytelling especially as a language. I think filmmaking, TV making is a language, and so it's a quest for fluency, and it's a lifelong pursuit. Yeah, let's jump into this.
So I've talked a lot about writing a screenplay for a feature-length film, and now I want to walk you through writing a television show, starting from how to write a pilot, then talking about the philosophy behind a particular show, then going through the characters and character change over the course of a season, and also talk about the structure of a TV show. Today I want to look at how to write a strong pilot. I'll show you the purpose of a pilot episode, how to write a pilot well, and how to set your story on the right track. Let's begin. As a writer, you'll usually not write an entire show or an entire season of a show on your own. Some writers have done that, like Nick Pizzolatto with True Detective and Taylor Sheridan with Yellowstone, but it's not the norm. When you're wanting to write a TV show, you will write a pilot. The pilot will be the first episode of your TV show. The pilot exists to do a lot of different things. Your pilot will set up the concept of your show, set up the philosophical ideas within your show, set up the characters of your show, start your characters on their show-long or season-long arcs, and it will showcase your talent as a writer.
Yeah, so far no disagreements. Yeah, this is like a starting from scratch kind of thing, which I get. I'm not saying don't do that. I'm just saying, yeah. And some of this stuff, I wouldn't say it's dated, but making a TV show, especially movies, are always kind of, this process is kind of always basically the same. But making a TV show is constantly evolving, especially with streaming, especially with so much of it going on just other sort of ad-based streaming services now versus the traditional way to do it. So he's right about all of it, but the idea that a creator would just write a pilot to make a show, that's true, but that's not the only way to do it. A lot of times they get adapted from other stuff. A lot of web series these days get adapted into stuff. In the case of like High Maintenance on HBO, for instance, they actually just took the first season, and I believe just put the first season out there as its web series on HBO, and then commissioned them to write other seasons, as I believe how that works. So it's complicated, and it's very it's pretty overwrought. There's no two ways to go about it. There's the traditional sort of network way, which is a writer writes a spec or pitches on an idea to a studio, and the studio decides they want to go forward with it and commission them to do a pilot after probably several rounds of notes. A lot of times, younger writers or less established writers will just pitch and sell either pitches or scripts, or they'll write their own spec scripts and pitch and sell those. But they usually won't get them made because there is a bit of a hierarchy still happening, especially in the network world, especially in sort of like primetime TV world. And so if you're just a young, low-ranking writer, you just don't have the clout and the connections to have people trust you enough. They'll trust you enough to buy it, but they won't trust you enough to even work on it necessarily. And so, best case scenario, they decide to go to pilot with it, which means they're going to hire a crew, and they're going to hire a director and a showrunner probably above you to work on it. And best case scenario, you're the co-showrunner with that established showrunner that's probably like a network person that is an established showrunner. But a lot of times you're not even in the writing staff at that point. So. And it's really on to just they're paying you to leave, basically. But that's the exception, like just like making movies, getting anything to the process of having had it shot is like the smallest percentage of things working. And so there's all those variables up until that point. And most of those variables is the financier's confidence in your ability to tell in the sort of the genre and the sort of story universe that they want, tone, all that kind of stuff. Like, you wouldn't be pitching the same thing to the CW as you'd be pitching to like HBO. They're different, different clientele, different. I can't even think of the word. Different preferences. You can try to be edgy on the CW, but it's really just going to be teen drama stuff, and that's what they do. Whereas HBO, edgy, like if you did something that would be considered edgy on CW, it would be insulting how bland it is to be on HBO. That's kind of the thing. So yeah, I'm trying to think what else. Yeah, as far as establishing what the pilot is, I agree. I think the thing he's overlooking, and this is a consequence of having not worked in the development side, and I have a fair amount worked in development. Yes, a pilot is establishing norms, establishing hallmarks, establishing characters, establishing tone, establishing sort of the beginning of what the character could arc to. All that kind of stuff is true, but it also depends on whether it's an hour-long drama or whether it's a procedural or whether it's a comedy. Because, the procedural, you really just want to establish the characters and establish the format as quickly as possible because you want people to sort of like hook in. Whereas an hour-long drama, it's very much about the spectacle. It's very much about the world being presented. Where a comedy is kind of different. This is changing because comedy is sort of becoming a different thing. There's the idea of like a dramedy now. But a lot of times... especially for like film festivals and for like writers programs, the recommendation is don't make it a premise pilot, make it a third episode pilot. So make it a sort of in the fashion of, instead of let's establish everything, because that takes too much work. Usually the pilots that get made tend to be premise pilots to establish the premise, but as far as reading it, as far as getting a good guess of what the show is going to be like, a third episode pilot, a pilot sort of once you're on your way, kind of a better way to work. Just from a creative standpoint. And then the other thing is like, if it's a comedy and you're writing a pilot, yes, plot is important, but plot is, especially in comedy, really second to the quality of the characters, the quality of the writing, and the quality of the jokes. And so I've been told, and I've experienced firsthand, the comedy pilots that really get noticed, that came out of nowhere, that didn't have some established thing that they're spinning off a web series or they're spinning off a one-man show or that kind of thing. They're just like the cold pilots that are absolutely spectacular, that don't have a name behind them, that go somewhere. It's because it's like 25% plot, 75% characters and jokes. And yeah, again, don't be submitting your pilot to places having not workshopped it quite a bit, because people want confidence. You don't want a situation where you read it and you go, okay, I see where you're going. You want to look at it and go, okay, this script is undeniable. This script is ready to go. Inevitably, every single person involved, especially that has money, will change the script because that's just what they feel they need to do in order to protect their investment. Good and bad for sure. But your responsibility as somebody writing the pilot is, especially in comedy, is to make it round, complicated, fascinating characters you want to spend time with, great character dynamics and emotionality, hilarious, incredible jokes. And if your comedy doesn't have jokes, it's a real dice roll on whether or not you want to call it a comedy. So again, all pilots sort of have similar rules, except, whatever genre or convention you're working in, there's best practices. So, okay.
So how do you begin writing a fantastic pilot? You will start your pilot just like any other story, with an idea. Remember, any idea can be good or bad. Ideas themselves don't immediately mean a story will succeed or fail. But some ideas are more immediately interesting than others. For example, a show about office workers going about their daily lives is not as immediately interesting as high school chemistry teacher decides to become a meth dealer.
He's really right. He's shockingly more right than I thought he would be, especially working in, sort of the film festival, reading scripts all the time circuit and the development circuit. Everybody after a certain level of having written scripts a lot of times can get to any idea, to get to where the characters are working, where the dynamics are working, where the plot is working. But if the idea is inherently weak, if the idea is inherently forgettable, if the idea doesn't wow you, you're working against yourself. The reason The Office, that was a really good example. The reason The Office, which is a very celebrated show, worked was not because of its initial premise. Honestly, if anything, that initial premise is incredibly mundane. The thing that worked about it was it had been established as a show overseas with the UK office. Obviously, they changed a lot of the US office, especially in the second season, to make it a little bit more American, a little bit more palatable. But yeah, it's a mundane. The premise of The Office is very mundane, and so even though the characters are beloved and compelling and incredibly rich and incredibly round, that kind of idea is not going to work as a pilot just because it's too thin. You need something catching. And so his example of Breaking Bad, yeah, again, that pilot was shown to everybody before AMC ultimately went for it, which is kind of ironic in its own right because it got denied so many times, which is often the case for pilots because, again, there's such a high level of uncertainty. You don't want to be the fancy network executive or the fancy studio executive who says yes to something and it completely torpedoes or costs a bunch of money or just humiliates the company. So it's easier to say no than it is to say yes. And so that's why an idea like Breaking Bad, which is inherently an absolutely unique idea, is always going to get noticed. Now, there's a responsibility for the writing to actually be delivered once you hear the idea itself. But yeah, he's totally right. There's no point in making anything mundane like The Office or Girls or what's another good one? I mean, Girls was sort of when I was in film school. Everybody wrote a spec for Girls. Everybody shot their thesis as like a Girls episode. I'm trying to think what's out now. I mean, Euphoria, but I'm not sure that's a good example either because Euphoria is so cinematic. I don't know. But if it's a mundane thing and or if it's an established thing that's really hot right now, don't bother because even if you sort of do better than what's already hot right now, by the time you get it in front of anybody, by the time it's in quality level where you should be getting it in front of people, the moment will have almost certainly passed. So don't try to, again, that's another lesson that I hope he addresses is don't try to jump on fads because if you thought of this fad that you're working on, if you're trying to jump on a fad now, just know that you have an entire industry of established writers who sell shows more than you, who are already or have already written something in this fad, and theirs is going to sell before yours if theirs sells, but more than likely you're going to miss the fad. And that's true for features too. So
this is just something to be aware of. Just because your initial idea is easy to pitch doesn't mean it will be good. And just because your idea doesn't immediately sound spectacular doesn't mean it can't be a fantastic show. So once you have an idea for your TV show, you want to understand your show's hook. Your show's hook is a 1 to 2 sentence explanation of the show's concept and what makes it unique or interesting.
Okay, he's calling it a hook. The industry term is logline or slugline or summary, but logline is the word everybody uses. Yes, it's basically two things. It's the short 1 to 2 sentence way, just like you said, way of describing your pitch to people. So yes, it's very important to make sure that the logline not only is compatible with what you're writing, but also sort of defines and drives what you're writing. And so a lot of times when I write stuff, I put the logline at the top of whatever I'm writing or on a sticky note somewhere nearby that I'm writing, because I don't want to deviate too far from the log line, because once you get it in good shape, once you get it tested, once you get it, undeniable, you just got to make sure that the writing now carries the undeniability that the log line does. And so it's not a good idea to deviate. Novelists and a lot of long form writers, like feature screenplay writers and a lot of hour-long drama writers will do the opposite. They'll just kind of just figure it out and just trust that they're gonna figure out their story as they go. Again, coming from comedy, coming from short form stuff, no, it's not worth it. You're just gonna end up having to delete those pages anyway, and it's gonna be work lost. So there's no point. Just stick to the log line, but make sure you really work on the log line. You really test the log line. You really make sure it's absolutely undeniable. And if the log line is more than 2 sentences, you've already messed up. Honestly, the best log lines are less than 2 sentences. They're 1 sentence tops. You kind of need an establishing sentence and then a consequence or a direction. That's kind of the format of the log line. So it's like establish the characters in the world, and then the consequences are where it's going to go. Ironically, a lot of shows that are on the air don't really have log lines. Like, what's the log line for Girls? Judd Apatow got Lena Dunham a show. What's the log line for The Office? they wanted to adapt the British Office. Like, there's really obvious examples of where logline is not irrelevant or is not relevant, but in most cases, when you're a writer pitching, yeah, people are going to ask for your logline because it's easier than having to sit through a summary or sit through a screenplay. Yeah, so work on it. But it's not called the hook; it's called the logline. The hook is the inherent idea that's also called sometimes the story engine, what the show's about. So, like in the case of The Office, the hook or the story engine is office workers getting by at their mundane job. That's the hook. Again, pretty low concept once you say it out loud. So anyway.
This can also be called your show's premise. Breaking Bad's premise is simple. A 50-year-old brilliant chemistry teacher finds out he has cancer and starts to cook and sell meth. This is the fundamental idea of your story, and it's what you need to show your audience in the pilot episode of your series.
Okay, that's an interesting direction. I would say the hook and the premise are inherently a little bit different because the hook needs to be continuously sort of reevaluated every episode. Are we still establishing the hook? Whereas the premise, in the case of Breaking Bad, for instance, he finds out he has cancer. He's gonna start making meth. Whereas in episode 2, he doesn't have to find out again. He's already making meth, and so he's making meth, and then this happens. And episode 3 is he's doing this, and then this happens, and then this and this happens. And so I don't know. But for the sake of a pilot, I guess that's fine. Yeah, I guess I agree. But I don't know.
Now that you have an understanding of the concept of your show, it's time to build the most integral element, the philosophical conflict. Fun concepts can hook an audience for a little while, but what keeps an audience coming back to a show again and again will be the core philosophical conflict taking place at the center of the show.
I've never heard anybody use the phrase philosophical conflict, but I think that's a really interesting way to put it. I like that. I like that as an idea. I kind of prefer it to what's a little bit more common of how you would put it, and it's theme. It's the theme of the show. What's the theme of the show? Breaking Bad, it's you could either say it's making a dynasty or making a legacy, or what do you do when you have nothing left? That's sort of the I wouldn't say necessarily even those are the themes, but it's the core question of what the show is. So I guess the philosophical, how do you say it?
It will be the core philosophical conflict.
The philosophical, yeah, I guess. Oh man, philosophical, yeah. Anyway, okay, but it's usually just called theme, and if it's a family comedy, it's family, which is very limiting, and that's why every year there's more comedies that are not family comedies inherently. Yeah, but theme, and again, that's one of those things that I write at the top of whatever I'm working on because, again, just like the log line, the show has to be about that. A really good example of this, especially for writing, is Scrubs. Scrubs usually handles multiple stories, 3, 4, 5 stories in an episode, all sort of intertwined in A, B, C, D, E, if you've ever heard that. But they're all focusing around a theme. And so, a lot of times the theme is like my mistake. Like, usually the name of the episode is the theme of what Scrubs is doing, but that writing team especially did a really good job of making sure that every single episode, every single storyline addresses a different facet of the given theme for the episode. Some shows don't do it quite as specifically as that. I like Scrubs because there's like a good symmetry in how they work. Anyway.
Taking place at the center of the show. Breaking Bad isn't just about a chemistry teacher who decides to cook meth. It's about something much deeper. When we meet Walter White in the beginning of the show, we meet a man who is essentially sleepwalking through life. He is intelligent, a brilliant chemist, and has won a Nobel Prize. But he is not respected. He teaches disrespectful high school students at his main job, and then gets yelled at by his boss at his second job. And on a particularly bad day, he has to clean the wheels of his student's car. Walter's wife and brother-in-law don't respect him. His son Walter Jr. looks up to his uncle, not his father. Walter is a man without control and without respect, and inside he desperately wants both. When Walter is diagnosed with cancer, suddenly his world changes. Instead of living passively, the cancer wakes him up and it jolts him into going after what he really wants. Walter is awake. He is finally going after the power and control he's always wanted. Getting cancer changes his beliefs. Breaking Bad is not just about a high school teacher becoming a meth cook. Breaking Bad is about a man who is taking action because of a sudden change in his philosophical beliefs. This is how you need to look at your story as well. What are your characters lacking at their core? What do they truly want? Not just externally, but who do they want to be? Do they want respect? Power? Control? What are their values? And how do those values come into conflict with other characters?
Yeah, I totally agree. Again, he's just talking about character stuff now. And this is especially important to ask these questions about all the main characters. And if you're really going for it, every character in the story. Obviously, especially in a pilot, you only have 55 pages or 49 pages, or in the case of a sitcom, 30 pages tops probably. Even if you're doing standard, screenplay format, which again, I recommend unless you're doing a multi-camera show. Everything uses sort of feature screenplay format, and the difference is TV shows have act breaks. And that's not even universally the case, because if you're doing something premium like Showtime or HBO or something, you don't even need to put in the act breaks. It's just a regular screenplay. But yes, the character work, yes, for sure. What else was I going to say? I lost my train of thought now. Let's see here. The premise. Oh, what I was going to say is, yes, he's using Breaking Bad as his sort of case study, which, yes, I mean, first of all, a ton of people have seen Breaking Bad, and it's undeniably a brilliant everything about the show. Like, the show is undeniable for all the reasons. It doesn't hurt that this is not Vince Gilligan, the showrunner's first show, by a mile. He'd been in the industry for 15, 20 years before he did this, so that helps. But, I think it'd be a little bit more useful if he sort of varied up, Tyler Mowery I'm talking about now, if he varied up sort of the examples, because, again, once the show clicks and fires on all cylinders the way obviously Breaking Bad does, it's really easy to point to what's working, but it's a lot more muddled and there's a lot more uncertainty when you're working with more complicated stuff. That's not quite as cut and dry as universally beloved, universally considered great writing. I think it's a misconception, honestly, that badly written shows have bad writers. Sure, I believe there is an example of that at any given point, for sure. I don't see how there couldn't be, just because of how many shows get written constantly. But most of the time, you'll find that even if you find like a badly written show, and the show ends, and you actually track the writers going on, a lot of times they'll go on to a well-written show, and vice versa. A good writer will work on a well-written show and then end up on a badly written show. And it's because it's not up to them. The quality of the writing, and especially the tone of the show, which is really what I think people are trying to describe when they're talking about a badly written show, is the tone and sort of the hallmarks and just where the show goes, is really up to the pilot script and the showrunner and the network. And that has very little to do with the individual writers. So, it is what it is. I just thought I'd mention I think that's a huge misconception, because honestly, the average skill level of any writer working on any TV show right now is very, very high, because it's so hard to break in, because it takes so many years and it takes so much discipline, and just, talent can only get you so far. And so the people that make it into the rooms and stay in the rooms, especially, they're working on a very high level. They really are. And part of that is they're hitting it constantly. They're hitting it every single day. 5 days a week if it's a TV show. If it's a movie, they're on their own schedule probably, and it could be 3 months, finish a thing, sell it. 3 months, finish a thing, sell it. I mean, it's a thing that happens. And so to discount the quality of writing of a show that's considered badly written is to not really think about how much effort is actually put in. That's why you see sort of a well-run, generic show that goes on to a million seasons, and then when the show ends, all the writers that are still staffed either go on to run shows for that network because they're, company people at that point, or more likely, they basically every network buys a pilot from them, and they get to sort of go work on their own thing. That's really what happened with Vince Gilligan. That's what happened with Matthew Weiner, I believe, for whatever that show was, Mad Men. Sopranos is kind of the same thing. All the shows that we consider sort of the peak of what television is, not only are they not the first show that this writer's worked on, but the writer has had an entire career to sort of establish themselves and establish the tone. And so this is the show that they wanted to make. And that's definitely the case for Breaking Bad. So that's why I don't know that Breaking Bad is a great example, because it's mastery at a level that a young writer just doesn't have access to based on experience alone. So I would offer up something else. Honestly, Girls might be a good example because that's Lena Dunham's first show, and it's peaky. It hits and it doesn't hit, that kind of thing. So difference is, Girls is pretty polarizing. Again, so it is what it is.
Notice that the other characters, like Hank and the disrespectful high school students, aren't simply external obstacles. They directly show Walter how little power and respect he has. They directly attack his self-image and self-worth. This takes time and skill to correctly understand and implement into your show. But learning how to do this will be the singular most important thing you can do to strengthen your writing.
I agree. And again, so much of writing a pilot especially is in the rewrite, is in the revisions. And so that's why sort of my system of what I do is I'll go through the process, leave no stone unturned, getting the log line working and getting the pitch working. And then I'll go through the process of how I write my thing. And it's a little bit different every single time, but it's mostly just you outline the whole thing, you write it. That's the vomit draft. Nobody gets to see that because it's literal vomit. And then I go back after, as much time as I can spend away from it as possible to sort of reset my brain and break the connections. And then I reread it critically, and I fix it. And once I've gotten to a point where I think I've fixed everything I could possibly fix in the vomit draft, that's my draft one. That's the draft that goes out to a group of people that I trust, and they read it, they give me notes. Usually it's in a writer's group, so I'm giving them notes for stuff too, because it's unfair for me just to get notes from everybody. That's just a thing that happens. But I'll take the notes, I'll sit on it, I'll probably try to let my brain reset, but I'll make sure I take meticulous notes so that after my brain resets, I still understand my notes, and I'll go back and I'll fix it. And it's this iterative process. And so a pilot, I'd say for my writer's group, four rounds of workshop maybe before the pilot's sort of where I'd say where we at sort of average. Some people can do it in 2, some people can do it in 7 or 8. Depends on the pilot too. Again, I've had it in a couple, I've had it in 30. But the revision, there's a value in revision. And so, and part of that is just establishing your network and establishing people you can trust to workshop with, and the chemistry of the workshop and that kind of thing. But the other thing is you got to have people in your network that are executives, development people, film festival people, anybody that does this for a living. Again, festival reader, screenplay reader, done it a lot, seen a lot, or you get to a certain point where you just kind of know, like it is a thing. It's a cliche. You read the first page, you know that you don't necessarily need to read the other 29 pages because it's either going to be fine and you should keep reading, or that it's just going to be the same or worse. You just know. I've never anecdotally been surprised, and I've probably read professionally between 25 and 3,500 scripts. So I haven't been surprised yet. I've been pleasantly surprised by stuff that I was like, this is great, I hope it gets better. It has never gone the other direction. So, but yeah, have a writer's group, have people you trust, but also have a different echelon of people that you can selectively give your script to that have an eye for this kind of stuff, especially if they work in development, because then they're working with people who are buying stuff. Then they're working with people who are on the cutting edge, who are reading working writers, and they know what you're up against. Because it's nice to just have a kumbaya writers group where everybody's sort of on the same page, but until you have the experience, and especially somebody who is experiencing what's being shopped and what's being sold right now and reading those kind of things, you just don't know what you're up against. It's as simple as that.
You have an understanding of the different beliefs and ideas within your story and how your characters will act upon what they believe, you can begin structuring your pilot episode. There's a great video by Lessons from the Screenplay where he breaks down the structure of the Breaking Bad pilot, and I recommend you check out that video. I will be taking a slightly different look at the structure of the Breaking Bad pilot, but I recommend watching his video as well.
Again, survivor's bias. It's the Breaking Bad pilot. It's famously an excellent pilot. My advice, especially if you're writing a pilot, is if you're writing something in a similar format to Breaking Bad, for instance, is just straight up copy down every plot point in Breaking Bad and where it happens and how much dialogue happens with it, and then graft your stuff onto it, because that's going to give you a huge head start. And I kind of recommend that for anything. If you're writing an episode like Euphoria, take the best episode of Euphoria and try to graft your stuff onto that. It's not considered plagiarism because it's going to have to be yours anyway. As long as you're not using the same characters and the same plots, it doesn't really matter. If they mastered the structure, you might as well take what they mastered. You're going to have to rewrite it anyway. So yeah, holistically speaking, I don't work that way from a pilot perspective because I do sort of see value in sort of finding what's so great about the pilot in the vomit draft and the subsequent couple of drafts. So I don't necessarily photocopy, plots and stuff from like Scrubs or something. Again, I like Scrubs a lot as a good example because I like the multiple storylines. I don't do that anymore. I used to do that. I've had some success, and it's fine. Who cares? But more importantly, one of the things that's going to make your pilot stand out from everybody else's pilot is your confidence in your storytelling ability and your confidence in the scene, and that it's going to be inherent. And so, to photocopy and then put your own thing on top, if that gives you confidence, then go ahead and do it. If you don't need it, or if it works against you, don't do it. Because you're going to have to establish your own kind of writer's confidence in the scenes, and it can't be faked. It just can't. You can read confidence and you can read insecurity, and insecurity is not endearing. Just like dating, insecurity is not endearing. So
The Breaking Bad pilot starts off with a teaser. The teaser of your pilot is built to hook the audience into this episode. Teasers are usually very short, around 1 to 3 pages. The goal is to get in and get out and simply leave the audience wondering what in the world is about to happen in this show.
yeah, he's talking about teasers. They're also called cold opens. It really depends. A comedy usually calls it cold open, but again, it goes teaser. Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, depending on how many acts you have. You can have either one act or as many as 7 or 8. It really doesn't matter. And then sometimes there's a tag or a post credits or whatever. But just the way I work, if I'm not working off of any kind of template, it goes cold open, Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, Act 4, and then the tag is usually not plot connected because that's a good place to farm new ideas, and it's just a good place to sort of offer up a little extra, like, hey, this didn't make the pilot, but this is a fun idea in case you're interested, or this is an extra joke or an extra little wink that just didn't fit anywhere else. That's the tag. And I think those two, the teaser and the tag, or the cold open and the tag, are incredibly useful. But he's totally right. Get in, get out as quickly as possible. That's the rule for scenes anyway. That's the rule for any scene you're going to write anyway, is get in as late as possible, get out as early as possible, and move on. There's nothing great about a long screenplay. The very first thing I do, no matter what genre, no matter if it's TV or film, the first thing I do is I check the page count, because if it's a feature film, for instance, and the page count is 140 or 150 pages, that's not a good sign. Martin Scorsese, James Cameron, the established old men can do these really long screenplays, but 90 to 110 minutes is standard. These days, 80 to 90, honestly, especially for comedies, for features. And that trickles down, if it's an hour-long drama and it's 75 pages, that's not a good sign. Vince Gilligan can do it. Young writer can't. If it's network TV, 49 pages. If it's, premium TV somewhere that's giving you a proper hour, 55 pages is kind of pushing it. And again, half-hour stuff. Some half-hour shows are 17 pages. Most of them, sort of, especially the pilots, exist around 30. 35 is pushing it. I'd say probably 27 is pretty good. 22, possibly. There's a thing called overwriting, and shorter is better. Shorter in, like, efficiency in language and efficiency in the writing is better at all times. And that goes for any kind of format. But honestly, especially screenplays, especially when you're trying to deliver as efficiently as possible the information, yes, the script has to read efficiently and has to be a good experience to read. And a lot of that has to do with the minimum amount of information needed to tell the story possible. Because as soon as you get long-winded, that's when people get bored and turn it off. So
Breaking Bad's teaser starts with a flurry of action. An unknown man wearing a gas mask drives an RV through the desert. 2 dead bodies slosh around in mysterious liquid behind him. The RV crashes, forcing the man to prepare to face the police in pursuit of him. He takes out his gun, ready to fight. This teaser is intense and gets the audience hooked into the rest of the show. Now, the rest of the show follows a 4-act structure. But rather than taking a look at each of the acts, I want to look at the story as a whole and examine how it works within the story circle. If you've watched this channel, you know I've covered the story circle at length. Links below for detailed videos on the story circle.
Yeah, big fan of the story circle. Credit to Dan Harmon from Community and Rick and Morty and Smart House, actually. Or Monster House, I guess. Monster House. He also has an Emmy for... he co-owns an Emmy with Hugh Jackman and Ben Schwartz for the musical bit at the Oscars one year, which is hilarious to me. This is Dan Harmon's thing. I use this. I use this for everything because it's simple. You know, you can sort of graft on the acts where you want to graft on. It doesn't really matter. But the way Dan Harmon set this up is as simple as possible because it works. It's basically the hero's journey. It works though, and it works, and it's scalable, and it works. It's such good guidelines. I use it on everything to this day. And when I'm having trouble with the script where I can't figure out what's not working, but something's not working, this is how you fix the plot. This is how you can also graft on the emotional moments for the characters. It's such a good tool, and it's so good because of its simplicity. If there's one thing you can take away from this or Tyler Mowery's thing, it's Dan Harmon's story circle. He invented it because he was having so much trouble with young directors on his Channel 101 festival that he was doing, where they just didn't understand how to plot, like actually plot a character's arc or a character's story. So he was just giving them to this for free, and it's the best. The fact that I've never come across a film school that teaches it this way concerns me. So
the story circle is a fantastic way to write any story, from a novel to a short script, and it works great for an episode of television as well. Let's take a look at the Breaking Bad pilot and look at how it fits within the story circle. In the beginning, we meet our main character, Walter White. He is intelligent but bored, mentally strong but powerless. We see what Walt wants, even though he doesn't go after it. He wants respect and control, and we see his reaction towards others who belittle him. At the end of Act 1, Walt collapses, and Act 2 starts out with Walt's unfamiliar situation. Walt is crushed by this news, but he adapts when he goes on the ride-along with Hank and sees a former student of his fleeing the crime scene. Walt continues to adapt and teams up with Jesse to cook meth, and it is here we begin to get a stronger sense of what Walt really wants. Walt is continuing to adapt. He invests thousands of dollars into this new enterprise and steals from his high school. Act 4 of the pilot brings us through the rest of the circle. This pilot has been about showing Walter White in the world he lives in. Now we are getting a taste of what's to come, and what this show will be about. Walter and Jesse take their RV out into the middle of nowhere, and Walter gets what he wants. They cook their first batch of meth.
So if you're a different kind of structure person, the cooking meth part is the fun and games. It's the middle of the story. You know, the fun and games starts with him going on the ride along, and it ends with him I think they pass out, or they get busted by the guys. The guys break into their trailer. I forget actually what happened.
But this comes at a cost. When Jesse goes to sell the newly cooked meth, everything blows up in his face. His old partner is angry at him for running when the DEA showed up, and he forces Jesse to take him and his brother to Walter. The drug dealers are looking to take the meth and kill both Walter and Jesse, but Walter ends this conflict by killing the two men. This does not return Walt and Jesse to a familiar situation, since this is the pilot of a TV show, but it does end the conflict for this first episode, while still giving lots of room for further conflict in the future. The show is now set up, and Walt has changed. He is finally awake. He has only 2 years to live, and now we have the setup for the rest of the show.
Yeah, no complaints. Again, it's kind of easy when it's such an outstanding pilot, but I highly encourage you, print out the story circle, watch a pilot or a movie or just any episode of TV, and have this story circle and fill in as you're going during the episode what each of these moments are across this story circle, because honestly, it works for almost everything. And you can actually find in a lot of episodes that you're like, well, something is going wrong. You can use the story circle to figure out what's actually not working. Most of the time it's character motivations, and most of the time it's something in the first like 3 or 4 numbers because something didn't get set up properly. It's super useful. So I recommend.
Your pilot will set the tone for your entire show. It will introduce the concept of your show, introduce the philosophical conflict, and show who your characters are and the journey they will be on. Remember that a good concept can only take you so far. Strong characters, deep conflict, and skillful writing will matter much more than having the perfect show idea. Writing a screenplay...
He said basically all these elements are important, but the big thing is you need to have a, you know, how do you say it actually?
Writing will matter much more than having the perfect...
Okay, so the writing, the conflict, and the characters matter much more than the perfect show idea. For pitching, for selling the idea, no, I'm sorry. I've especially in screenplay reading been in a lot of situations where the writing is undeniable, the characters are not undeniable, but the initial conceit or the world or just the premise of the show is too small or is too weak or is incompatible with whoever I'm working for. That's happened a lot. Lifetime Movie Network has a certain kind of brand. It's not going to be the same as, you know, Shudder TV. It's just not. So I disagree with him in that you really do need to put stock into having a fantastic initial idea, but then you need to make sure all the stuff that's the writing responsibility needs to catch up to it. Again, anybody who writes, anybody who workshops can get skill for writing, deep conflict, strong characters to work just by workshopping. It really is that simple. When I see screenplays, when I see movies that the writing just isn't there, I don't go, oh my God, these people don't know how to write, usually. Most of the time I go, oh my God, they didn't have enough time, or they didn't show it to enough people, or they didn't get useful notes, because it is iterative. But that has very little to do with the initial idea. The initial idea is a completely different animal. You got to nail the initial idea. That's why I have what I call a slush pile. It's just a Google Doc with every idea I've ever had, and I cross out ones that I've written, and I'm constantly looking at it, and I'm constantly adding to it, I'm constantly taking stuff off of it, because, you know, it's much harder to come up with a brilliant idea than it is to come up with 20 good ideas. And so I put the good ideas in there. One day I know I'm going to inevitably add a brilliant idea to it. That's the one I want to work to. Quick way for me to figure out what is the difference between a good idea and an undeniable idea or a brilliant idea. The brilliant ideas keep coming back to you. The brilliant ideas stick to you. If I wake up more than twice in a 6-month period with the same idea, or going back to, man, remember when I did, that's the undeniable, that's the brilliant idea. That's the idea you want to hit on, because it stays with you, because it haunts you. These good ideas, they're good, and they're good for episodes, but they may not be good for an entire show. The ones that you go, man, remember 10 years ago when I had that idea? Why didn't I do anything with that? That's the idea you need to do. But you also need to make sure that it's not just you're in love with how you felt with the idea, that the idea itself is actually undeniable, because, man, we had such a good night that night when we were drinking beers and we came up with this idea. That's not the same thing. The idea itself has to be undeniable, not your feelings about the idea. So, yeah.
Perfect show idea. Writing a screenplay for a pilot or a feature can be a difficult task. Many new writers struggle with writer's block and procrastination and never even finish a single script. And some writers get 20 or 30 pages into their screenplay and give up. If that's you, then I have a video for you to watch where I show you how you can write 5, 10, even 15 pages a day consistently, and finally overcome your fear of writing. Click the first link in the description to watch it now. And if you like this video, leave a like and subscribe for more videos just like this one. Thanks for watching.
Yeah, so the last thing he talked about, you know, here I have a video for you to show you how to write a bunch of pages. Again, any way to write pages is the right way to write pages, because the important thing is getting it on the page, because that way you can finish the vomit draft, go through it, ideally spend time away from it to sort of reset your brain. That's how I've found to work the best. But most importantly, get the script into workshops, get proper, incisive, you know, incredible, specific kind of notes, especially from points of view that actually have some sort of investment in the industry. Ideally a development person, because they're the ones looking for buyers, finding buyers, seeing what's out there, seeing what the SNL alums that just left are selling, so that you don't write that script, because you're screwed if, like, Cecily Strong or Bo Burnham is writing a script you need to know what script they're shopping right now, because you don't want to write that because they're going to sell it. It's just what they do. There's no point in competing with it. Another anecdote, and it's happened almost every single year since I've been doing workshops. Somebody in the group has a brilliant idea, and then within a week or within a month, there will be a show announced that is exactly that idea. Because if you're working in the zeitgeist, it's a matter of time. It's happened to me maybe once every 3 or 4 years. Happened to my buddy last year, happened to my other buddy 2 years ago. It's going to continue to happen just because it's the thing that happens. So what's crazy is sometimes multiple things get bought at the same time, and then they both get turned into pilots, and sometimes they even get turned into shows, and they're like the same show. It's the weirdest thing. Takeaways. Helpful, but a little oversimplification. Again, he's squeezing it into 9 minutes, and I'm not. Very useful. My only real criticism or critique about how he was delivering the information was, yes, it's very useful to look at something proven and established and excellent, like the Breaking Bad pilot. Most pilots are not going to be undeniable like that. They're just not. And so it would have been harder, and it would have been a lot more conceptually, jumping through hoops to pick something different, or to pick multiple things. I think is actually more useful than just the Breaking Bad pilot. But I get why he did it. But again, it's like, if you want to work at the level that's going to make you level up, you got to work sort of at a higher level than what you think you're capable of, and then you get to it, and then you keep going up. And so in the case of writing a pilot, pilots are by their very nature really, really, really hard, because there's all this uncertainty around it. And so the best thing you can do, the best advice I can give you, is write it and then get it into workshops and just keep working on it. You really need to come up with a brilliant idea, and that can't be helped. You either have a brilliant idea or you don't. But once you get your brilliant idea and it's tested as a brilliant idea, everybody you talk to goes, "Oh my God, that's such a good idea. I wish I had it." That's the idea where you want to actually cash in your chips and write your pilot, because that's going to get you noticed. The closer it is to you, the closer it is to who you are as a person, really does help, especially right now. If you're a white kid and you're going to do a show about Jamaican pot runners, good luck. You can research all you want, but it's just not going to happen. However, if you're from Miami and you're doing something about car culture in Miami, and you're in that world already, you already have a conceptual leg up against any other person that's going to do anything in that sort of sphere already. And so you could be that person. It's daunting, but at the end of the day, it's just you beating your head against a computer until you got pages, and then putting those pages in a workshop, and then taking the notes like a champ, not fighting the notes, taking the notes like a champ, and then moving on with your life. I think Tyler Mallory did a pretty decent job of talking about that. I wish he would have talked more about the workshopping aspect, but it is what it is. Was this helpful? I don't know. Catch you next time.